you DNF a book, do you add it to your total? Hello everyone, it is finally May, can you believe it? I read 8 books in April, 9 if you count the one that I DNF'd, but I don't think I'm going to count DNF'd books, but I am going to talk about it. So I've read 27 out of my scheduled 100 for the whole year. Storygraph is telling me that it's 6 books until I'm back on track. But I don't really care about being on or off track because I'll read them when I read them. I've done quite well this month, so let's get reviewing. As I read books, I take little notes on my iPad so I don't forget. So if you see me glancing down, that's why, because there's a lot to remember this month. My first book for April was actually my first ever audiobook as well. I've never listened to an audiobook, and it was The Forgetting by Hannah Beckerman. The Forgetting is like a fiction mystery kind of vibe, and I'm gonna give it 4 stars. As usual, I'll always give you like a brief synopsis that I've got off the top of my head. So it follows dual storylines. So Anna wakes up in hospital after an accident with no memory of anything, just like full-blown amnesia, doesn't even know who her husband is. Her husband's very loving, seems very kind, seems like he's doing all the right things, but the doctors say it's normal. On the flip side, we have Livy, who's based in Bristol, just married to her husband, who I forget his name, keen to get back to work after 6 months of maternity leave. Feel like she doesn't really know that much about her husband, but then like someone starts stalking her. It turns out it's his mum. She's making a whole bunch of claims. The plot thickens. Basically, there's lots of twisted storytelling, a lot of secrets that start to kind of unravel about the storylines. Initial thoughts was that it's not really my kind of book. I don't really read like the mystery thriller genre anymore, and I was quite hesitant because it's an audiobook. I liked it because it was an English narrator. Couldn't really get used to the fact that they storytell as well, so the narrator's voice changes for male characters and stuff. It was a bit strange for me at first. I think it's because I'm used to listening to podcasts, so it's more conversational, but I ended up actually really enjoying it. It helped that it was a very tense book. I was really like hooked. It's hard for me to differentiate whether I actually liked the book or whether I had really low expectations for an audiobook, so I was pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did. So I feel like 4 is a pretty high rating, but giving it a 3 or a 3.5 isn't really fair. The second book was the book I DNF'd, which I'm very briefly going to touch upon. DNF is short for did not finish, and that's what happened with my second book. It's the first time I've ever DNF'd a book, so I felt a bit weird about it. So it's called Star Mother, it's by Charlie N. Holmberg, and it is a young adult fantasy. This was also audiobook format. So Star Mother, from what I understand, is about a girl that gets pregnant by a god and gives birth to a star, and she's the only person to survive it. Like it's normally like a sacrifice kind of deal. Probably not doing it much justice there. I was feeling good. I was on an audiobook high. I thought, wow, I've just done a whole book in like 2 days. Let's get another audiobook going. Obviously, I had not a huge selection on Kindle Unlimited, and I thought, let's try a fantasy. I went for Star Mother based on absolutely nothing other than it was like one of the first ones available and looked to have some good reviews, but I don't really like to heavily look at reviews before I commit to a book because I feel like it will cloud my judgment. I'm quite easily influenced by other people's reviews and often end up liking stuff that other people don't like, vice versa. The narrator was American, which I found quite difficult to kind of like get to grips with after listening to an English narrator on an audiobook. I just didn't love it. I'm finding it hard to differentiate whether I didn't like the writing or didn't like the fact that it was an audiobook. So I'm going to say it was a bit of both. I found it really, really, really hard to follow what was going on. There was a lot of time jumping, and the plot just seemed to progress really, really quickly. I found it myself quite distracted at some points and having to go back. I just didn't grip me. I didn't find it very interesting. I've never actually DNF'd a book before, so that was quite liberating. It was quite liberating to choose to not waste my time with something I knew I wouldn't enjoy. Book 3 was actually a physical book, but I lent it to a friend, so I don't have a physical copy to show you, so I'll just put a picture up somewhere. Book 3 was Circe by Madeline Miller. I feel quite confident that it's pronounced Circe. Circe is like a historical fiction / fantasy, and for me, this was a firm 5 out of 5 stars. So Circe is an adaptation of a bunch of Greek myths actually, but mainly from the Odyssey, and it's told from the witch Circe's perspective. I think I'm quite late to the party with this one, but I loved it. Beautiful, rich storytelling that just seemed to like never end. Obviously gods are ageless essentially, so it felt like it spanned over centuries, and that was just like so lovely. Loved the drama, loved the hubris, love Greek mythology, love Roman mythology, love all kinds of mythology, so that was really nice to read. Has it inspired me to go on a Greek themed reading binge? Yes. Greek mythology retellings are obviously incredibly popular at the moment anyway, so you will be seeing some more of them. If you have any recommendations, please let me know. What I enjoyed about it so much was that even though it felt like it spanned decades and centuries, and the storytelling was so vivid and so rich, obviously Greek mythology is very complex. It's got like a huge cast of characters, but I didn't feel lost at any point, and the book wasn't overly long. So even though it's like weaving all these characters together, and there is obviously traditionally quite a lot of incest in Greek mythology as well, and a lot of complex names, I didn't feel like I was struggling to figure out who was who at any point. Everything was so vivid. The characters, the complexities of the characters, the locations, the settings, that kind of like slight fantasy element, but still mixed in with the fact that there were humans readily available, like humans and gods like coexist. Oh, it was just lovely. And obviously the Greek mythology is always going to come through with a lesson as well. So it's not just gorgeous, fantastical, hot, sexy gods, love stories. There's always a lesson. Love it. You can tell by the first half of the month, I was very determined to read through some of my pile and kind of get out of the fantasy romance genre. It didn't last long. Next book, The Serpent of Wings and Night by Carissa Broadbent. Fantasy romance, 5 stars. Now I've seen Ms. Broadbent recommended to me a whole bunch of times, and I was not ready for a soul-crushing addiction to a new fantasy series, so I kind of put it off for a little bit. I was getting a bit bored of like fae human trope, and then I saw vampires and was like, synopsis time. Araya is a human who is adopted by the Nightborn vampire king. Obviously she lives around a bunch of vampires, they all hate her, but obviously he's the king, so the only way she can kind of be taken seriously is she decides to enter their equivalent of the Hunger Games. It's called the Kajari, and it's like basically a death tournament held by the goddess Nyx. This got a 5 for me because it is the perfect balance of action and smut and romance. I really enjoyed like the complex relationship between Araya and her dad as well. What's her dad called? I want to say he's called like Victor, but I feel like that's not a very like fantasy name. His name is Vincent. I really enjoyed the complexity of their relationship. Obviously him being like big evil bad Nightborn king, and her being a human, him hating humans but loving her. That was really nice. That was layered. I felt like that had good layers. One format that's always going to get me going is a tournament by death, a tournament with levels, a tournament with different settings, unknown trials and tribulations that are used against the contestants. They change every year. Hunger Games was my jam back in the day, so that format works really well for me. And then you throw in 2 people falling in love in it, yeah, go on then. Carissa really is talented at writing a smut scene. It's like the perfect blend of like romantic and smutty, but not so smutty that it makes you cringe. I forgot to mention I read that on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a Kindle subscription, that was free. For the next book, I went back to my TBR pile because the pile doesn't seem to be getting any smaller. I read I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a dystopian fiction and it gets 4.5 stars out of 5 for me. This tells a story of 39 women who are locked underground in a cage. That's like their whole existence. And then one day the alarm goes off and their guards disappear and they leave the key in the lock and they're free to go out. Bear in mind, none of these women remember how they got into the cage. They don't know where they are like in the world, and one of them was a child when she went into the cage, so she doesn't know anything of the outside life. I found this a little hard to get into. I do find that I saturate my brain with so much romanticy that it's a little hard for me to get into other books sometimes. I wasn't sure how I felt about this, but I ended up giving it such a high rating because it was really poignant. I feel like my 4.5 is a little bit unfair because it loses a star because I just want to know more. It's not long enough for me. I want for more with this book. I want context. I want to know the characters, I want to know names, I want to know what happened. I was about halfway through and I didn't think I was enjoying it, but I found myself like quite feral. I was rushing to get through it because I was desperate to know what happens. I was desperate to understand more about the world. Like, I would love to read more about the world that it's set in, but I guess that's part of the mystery, isn't it? Another Kindle read with Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is another fantasy romance and it gets 4.5 stars from me. It follows a character called Lilith. There's like a mystery plague disease, like she's basically dying, so is her entire village. And there is a vampire that lives high up on the hill and she's convinced she can get a cure from him. She strikes a bargain with this vampire. He's called Vale. She wants some vials of Vale's blood. They work together to get rid of this God-given plague curse thing, but not without falling in love first. A little bit more romance leaning, less action leaning, so perfect for me. Really, just, she's so good at writing romance and like smart. It's just such a nice book. Once again, the short ones are always the best one. It just left me wanting so much more, so I'm hoping that when the series is fully written we will get more from Lilith and Vale. She's not quite like a full sunshiny character, but it is kind of like sunshine grumpy dynamic that I know a lot of people love. The next book I read was The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. This is also by Carissa Broadbent. This is book 2 in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I should have reviewed them all together, but I didn't read them all together and the series isn't finished. So we've got The Serpent of Wings and Night, which is book 1. We've got Six Scorched Roses, which is book 1.5, and that's just a little 100-pager. It's like a segue novella even. And then we've got The Ashes and Star-Cursed King, book 2. 4.5. 4.5. I'm a little bit undecided, somewhere in between. 4.25. This book definitely has more action. There's a lot of world building, there's a lot of travelling, there's a lot of historical lore, a lot of political information that we're being drip fed. I know the setup is crucial, but I didn't really like Rain's character development for like the first 3/4 of the book. I know it's necessary, but he just pissed me off. I think anytime a man pisses me off in a book after being a good lover, I'm just like... I think for the first 3/4 of the book I was sat at 4 stars, but then in the last quarter it redeemed itself, so that's where we kind of lean towards that 4.5. In fantasy romance, book 1 is always a slow burn, and then book 2 they just end up like not doing it at all, or just pulled apart from each other, or hating each other, or just separate, and I'm just sick of my heart being put through the ringer like this. I just want them to live happily ever after and shag, but that wouldn't make for compelling reading though, would it? So I guess that makes sense. The next book read was Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. Very short contemporary fiction, 3.5 stars for me. Absolutely stunning cover that you can see I've trashed a little bit, which is a shame, completely an error on my part because it got thrown around in my bag. A mother and daughter are holidaying to Tokyo. We don't know where they've travelled from, they're just in Tokyo, and they just share things together. They go to art galleries, they go on hikes, they just have like little mundane everyday chats about horoscopes, about their family members. It's very, very simple and beautifully written. I'm really unsure on my rating, and this is where I need to have a bit more confidence in myself because it's me reading it. It's not what the general consensus is, because otherwise I'd be rating it something completely different. It was beautifully written. It was very serene landscape the author painted. It was very quiet and slow paced. I was hoping to find it more moving. I need to come to terms with the fact that something can be beautifully written and that I still didn't love it and hugely enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's a bad book because I didn't enjoy it. I just feel bad rating things that I know are good, slightly lower ratings, but that's a me problem. Lots of reviews speak about being moved by this book, and while I can understand why it would move people, it just didn't move me. That complex dynamic between mother and daughter where there's like a slight bit of disconnect, you know, when you realise that your parent is a person and not just a parent, that's really well captured in the book, and it like made me feel a bit awkward at times reading about it. I just think there's something I've missed when I've read this that hasn't clicked for me. I don't have any strong feelings about it, which to me is when a book is hard to like quantify with a number because that feels unfair. Now my last book for the month is a controversial one, and I fear it might be the longest review in this video because I need to like talk to process it. I read Haunting Adeline by HD Carlton. This was on Kindle Unlimited, it was free. I would probably say the darkest of all popular dark romances. I've been mulling over the star rating and I think I have to give it 3. Disclaimer alert, this review will contain spoilers. Content warning, if you don't already know about this book, there's going to be discussion of stalking, sexual assault, heavy sexually explicit themes throughout the book. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say on YouTube, but is a really big theme of the book, and human trafficking is also one of like the main plots of it, including everything that surrounds that. So please, if you want to skip out of this review, this is the last book I'm going to review for the month. Now we've got that out of the way, a little synopsis is in order. So Adeline, or Addie, as the main character's called, she's a writer. She just moved into her grandma's house. She lives in the PNW somewhere. I think it's Seattle, but I could be wrong. Someone starts stalking her. He's obsessed with her, he's got to have her, he's going to make her fall in love with him. She knows that someone is stalking her. She's initially quite frightened, then she's frightened some more, and then she's horny, and then she's frightened again. And all of a sudden we don't know where frightened ends and horny begins. This review is going to be all over the place because I don't know how to review it. You may have heard of the kink CNC, which is short for consensual non-consent or non-con. So to like break it down, it's consensual non-consenting. It's like a role play thing. Now if you are not into that at all, you're not going to enjoy this book. You're going to be horrified. I was pretty horrified. I understand that it's not my bag. I think you'll only enjoy this book if that is your thing, and that's fine if that's your thing. I still read it. I was just frightened for so long. This book was tense and scary. Did I read the whole thing? Yes. I don't really know why I read the whole thing. I was curious. I like to think of myself as quite an experienced reader of the dark romance genre, and this book made Den of Vipers look vanilla. Okay, so here's where some of the spoilers come in. If we remove the fact that he sexually assaults Addie and stalks her and like terrifies her until she eventually starts to fall in love with him, his job is like taking down human trafficking and like sexual trafficking rings, things like that. He kills a bunch of people. He has like this vigilante justice for saving women and children. He's clearly an incredibly traumatized dude because he makes himself watch like horrible footage of things happening and like lets it burn into his skull. I get that. I don't think what he's doing to her is much different from what's going on to them, and there's like a weird justification. I just don't like that. I know they're morally grey characters, like he's like, I'm a bad guy, like I kill people but I do it for the women and children, and then he's literally out here Addie. The author didn't write this book for it to be an easy read, so I'm just like falling straight into the trap of it. What I will say, very sneaky HD Carlton, it finishes on a huge cliffhanger, so obviously I'm on to the second one. I thought I'd be able to finish it today before I filmed this video to review them as like a whole, but I haven't been able to. So May's reading wrap up will start with a review of number 2. The hype got me curious because everyone was like 50-50. I love this book, 50-50. This book fucked me up. I think I'm probably more in the this fucked me up kind of camp. Right, so that is my April reads done for the month. Let me know what you think. There was some quite varied genres in there, I thought. I thought we had a lot of good variety this month. I will link my Storygraph in the description box. Please add me or follow me. I don't really know how Storygraph works. I rate my books as I read them, so as the month goes on. So if you want like a little sneak peek of what I've been reading, by all means take a look. And I'll see you next Sunday. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Bye.